Hello and welcome to episode 298 of Fergo and the Freak. I'm that bloke from Rugby League Project, Andrew Ferguson. You can find me on Twitter at AndrewRLP. And joining me as always is the glorious League Freak. You can also find on Twitter at League Freak. How you going there, mate?
I'm going all right, Andrew, but I'm doing way better than the people we're about to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah, it's Sunday night, so it's basically our weekly let's bitch and moan about the West Tigers episode, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's it's only something you could have really done over the last 20 years, 21 years. Are they 21 years old now?
Oh, feels like 300.
Yeah.
Every year feels like a decade. I figured I'm going to change it up a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's heard me bitch and moan about the Tigers. I don't want to go and repeat myself too much more on this, so I figured, you know what? Any dickhead can go out there and bitch and moan about something.
Yes.
I want to be productive.
Okay.
So I want to come up with a few ideas to help fix the club.
Okay, so what are your ideas? Tell me them.
First of all, I'm not sacking the coach.
Yeah, it's not his fault.
No, he's inherited a complete basket case of a salary cap, a roster that's atrocious, and he's just had to sit there with this, absolute dumpster fire and wait for all the contracts to come to an end because obviously no other club wants these players. That's why they're at the Tigers.
Yeah.
That's why they can't offload them. So he's finally got to the point now where at the end of this year, the majority of those players who are taking up huge amounts of salary cap space are off contract, which means he's getting himself prepped to go, right, I can start finally turning this club around and getting what I want here, get the players I want here, and start building the squad that I want. Mm-hmm. I'm sure he's been working towards that steadily in the last few years where he can. But he has been held back quite a bit by this cap mess.
Yeah, there's only so much he could do. Like, if you look at his time at the club and you look at some of the players he's been able to actually buy in, there's not too many that you could look at and say, it'd be good to keep that guy.
Yeah, and let's be honest, he's taken a punt on a few players who have been shit. That's Joey Leilua and James Roberts.
Yes.
Now, Leilua's issues are well known. That is, he's got a tendency to have a brain snap every 5-6 minutes.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's playing alongside his brother means that he's not focused on playing football. He's focused on protecting his little brother, even though his little brother is a huge fucking beast and can destroy anyone if he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
And so Leilua has not had a single good game for the Tigers. He hasn't even touched his average form at the Raiders yet.
No. I think there's been one game where, in this whole time at the Tigers, I think there was one game where you were like, is this it starting? And that was it.
Yeah. So he's atrocious. James Roberts. The only good thing about the signing of James Roberts is that we didn't pay $1 million a year for him like we probably would have if he had been at his peak.
Yeah.
But his defence has been atrocious and it has got worse. So,
yeah, and I can't even blame James Roberts because the circumstances they got him under, like, that's what do you expect kind of thing.
Yeah, this is the thing though, is they have signed him and they've treated him like a marquee player because they keep putting him in the run-on side in the 13. So essentially, you've got to pull your weight. All this year, he's been out of position. His defensive reads have been abysmal, and he has no idea how to make first contact in a tackle. He'd run up, he's grabby, and he gets pushed off by anyone and everyone on a regular basis. And today, he was running up into no man's land, which is the space between two attackers, and just watching the play unfold beside him and then past him. And I thought, why are we persevering with this bloke at centre? He can't defend. He needs the assistance of a sideline on one side so he doesn't have to worry about what's going on outside him. The sideline's over there. Players aren't going to run there. He just needs some, if he's got the sideline on one side, knowing players aren't going to go there, then all he's got to do is force players back infield to where all his other defenders are.
Yeah.
And that's how you protect the player who's a shit defender like he is. But for some reason, we don't put him on the wing. We keep putting him at centre. He's just woeful. And so, you know what? I'm willing to say right now, that experience, that whole experiment needs to end. I'm done with it.
Yeah.
And I think the club needs to stop. They need to stop having this rose-coloured glasses thing that they do all the time with players. And just go, you know what? We need to start being pricks. If we want to be successful, we need to start being pricks, okay? So if you haven't been performing, then fuck off.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's our fault, your fault, whatever, it's obviously not working, so bye. Simple as that. That's what they've got to do. There's a lot of talent which is coming off contract at the moment. And the biggest one, which no one's talking about, is Nico Hines at the Storm.
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting behind Ryan Pappenhausen for a gig at fullback. He's sitting behind Cameron Munster for a gig at 5'8". This kid is an absolute gun. The Tigers could pick him up and he would walk into any spot in that back line that he wanted to, and they could get him without having to spend $1 million on him. And he's a match winner. That guy just knows how to play football. You just put him in the back line, he's fine. He's filled in on the wing, he's filled in at centre, he's filled in at fullback like he did tonight for the Storm and had an absolute blinder. He can play in the halves at a stretch if needed be. Get him, put him at fullback. That's what I reckon. And then you get Dane Laurie, put him at 5'8". Go and buy Adam Reynolds.
Well, that's the thing that I don't understand is that, that seems like a really straightforward plan, a really great plan to start with, But the West Tigers, when they put a team together, it's not via a plan. It is just chucked together. I was thinking, how many big-name players have they signed in the last 10 years? And it's very, very few. And I'm not even talking about top-of-their-game players. I'm talking about, James Tarmo was about as good as I could think of. That they're a top-of-the-line player at some point. And they signed him at the right time of the year, which is mid-year. But everyone else they tend to get after the player market has finished sorting itself out, and it's the dregs that are left over or players that are left behind because clubs don't want them anymore. That's the vast majority of when their recruitment starts, and that's not having a plan.
Yeah, that's right. So I've gone through and I think that the following players we need to get rid of them at the end of this year to free up a ton of money so that we can buy another group of players I think we should be looking at. So Luke Brooks, he's reporting on somewhere between 700,000 and $1 million. I put him down for 800. Joel Olua, I'm sure he's just over $500,000. Moses and Bison almost $1 million. Russell Packers on 700K or something like that. Billy Walters, I don't think he's on much, but he's barely played. And James Roberts, who I'm going to assume he's on about 300,000 or 400,000 a year. So that would come to about 3.5 million that we've got in the cap tied up in those players who are not winning us games, and yet they're taking up that much of our cap space. And so I'd be going out and looking to buy Xavier Coates, Nico Hines, Semi Valemi, the winger at the Raiders. He's tall. He's got a bit of speed about him. Good leap on him. Good target for a kicker. Adam Reynolds, Brodie Jones from the Knights. Jackson Hastings, I've got no say over that because I've already bought him. Lachlan Fitzgibbon from the Knights as well. I like. He's a very good defender.
Yeah, he's a solid player. I like him as well.
And Bunty Afoa and Jazz Devanga from the Warriors. Decent defenders, and they do some good runs in the middle as well. Very strong humans. Hang on to Dane Laurie, David Nofaluma, Adam Dewey, Tamo, Jake Simpkin, Stefano Utokumanu, Luciano Leilua, Alex Twal. They'd be the Tigers players who I'd hang on to that would be able to keep their spot in the side if we had some of these new signings around them.
Yep.
And everybody else who keeps getting into the 17 would be sitting as depth players.
Yeah.
So Musgrove, Sean Bloor, I actually don't mind him. I reckon he'd probably be on the bench, along with Offahangawi. Then you've got Jacob Little, McKaylee, Alex Seyfarth, Tommy Talau, Jock Madden is the young halfback. Zach Cheney is a young centre. Luke Garner, Tom Amoni, Tukey Simpkins is a big unit, and Michael Cheekham. There's your 30-man squad, and there's a lot more depth in that. And you're not paying overly through the nose for it. You've got depth across the park, and you've got a much more competitive team.
Yeah, I agree. And look, it would all obviously revolve around getting Adam Reynolds. They'd have to pay $1 million for him, but I think he's worth it. And I think physically he doesn't look like a player that's about to break down at any point. And the thing about getting Reynolds is if you get a Reynolds, Laurie's there straight away. Like, we know that Laurie is going to be able to step into that 5/8 role and be very, very good at it. I like it. I actually like it. I think that there's really the big target being Reynolds, and then after that, you're not really overstretching for any of the other players that you looked at.
That's right, and they'd be players you can sign for 3 years. You're not going to be spending a ton of money on them, and you're going to be getting, every year they're going to get better because they're still quite young. You're not getting them at the end of their careers or anything like that. Now, in order to get those purchases, we need to sack the idiot that's running the club, Pascoe, whoever the morons are that do recruitment, the idiots who do retention, the wage thieves who are sitting there doing junior recruitment and pathways and stuff like that because they've done fucking nothing.
Yeah.
Okay? We need to get rid of all of those and get people in those roles who know how to run a rugby league team successfully. And once we've got all that set up, we then say, okay, Madge, you've got this squad. We'll give you 1 year to let them all gel and get everything sorted out the way you want it. And then second year, that's where we want to see some absolute results on the field. We need to be in the finals. That's the bare minimum. Okay?
Yeah.
And if you don't get us to the finals in the second year, if we give you that roster and all that coaching set up behind you, if you don't get the finals in the second year, we will get a new coach.
Do you think it's possible to do that over the course of the next, and that would have to all happen over the course of the next 8 months? Do you reckon that you can honestly do that at a club? Look, like, I think if you've got the backing to do it, and you've got somebody that's in charge of making all of those moves, I think you can do it. And I think we saw that at the Panthers when Phil Gould went in there as the general manager and they said, this club is broken, fix it. And he did. He made all of those changes. But do you think that you've got the ability to do that at the West Tigers when there's really nobody in charge who has that power to do that? Because the thing is, like, it can't be the CEO, because the CEO is terrible, and you've just got to go by results. The results are abysmal by any measure you want to go by. So it can't be him. So it's got to be somebody above him that does all of this and that has the backing, complete backing of the board. Do you reckon you can do that at the West Tigers?
This is the problem, is there's no precedent. No club has been so dismal results-wise, roster management-wise, and management-wise. I'm talking about off the field here. I'm not talking about coaching. No team has been so abysmal for so long as this West Tigers has in the modern game. So there's no way of knowing if it's possible to make these changes or not, because there's too many incompetent people involved in the most important parts of running the club. And this is highlighted ever so perfectly when you just look at the Tigers' results over the last, 9 years, they're the only team over the last 9 years not to make the finals. Hell, they're the only team since 2016 that hasn't been in the finals. Every other team has made the finals since 2016. Even the Titans, even the Warriors. That's... I mean, even the Knights. Cast your mind back to 2014, 15, 16. That Knights side was dire. They almost went through a season without winning a game. And yet, they're back in the finals.
Yeah, statistically one of the worst teams ever.
Yeah.
And yet they've managed to... And it's not like you look at the Knights and you say, wow, there was some sort of revolution where they had a once-in-a-lifetime influx of junior players come through or anything. They've literally just steadily built their team.
Yep.
With
a rookie coach.
Yeah. It's crazy to me when you think of it that way, that like since the last time that the Tigers made the finals, we've seen like teams be good and then absolutely terrible and good again.
Yeah.
Within that time frame.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Every other team is able to turn around their misery and get back into the finals. Mm-hmm. And sure, the misery might come back. They might have another few seasons and they've got to rebuild and stuff like that, like the Bulldogs are doing now. But I am more confident that the Bulldogs will be back in the finals again before the West Tigers are.
Yeah, I am too. And
the Bulldogs at the moment they're rough to watch.
Yeah.
I don't think they've got the right coach. I don't think their roster is at all set. But I've got more faith in them making the finals before the Tigers next.
I've got more faith in the Bulldogs will luck into a couple of players that will push them into the finals.
Yeah, I mean, even though they've been in the wilderness for several years and their attack has been dire, and they've had all this drama off the field, they still managed to change their board and a lot of people who are, running the club poorly, and then attract current, top-line players.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they've got Josh Adokar next year. They've got Matt Burton. He's not even close to realising his potential yet. They're going to get him before he hits his peak, and he's just going to keep getting better. They've got Nick Kotrick, that fullback from South, young fella. They've got a lot of great young players there, so they're building forwards.
Yeah,
Tigers aren't.
No, and like I think one of the best ways to think about how long the Tigers have been bad, they were not making the finals when Matthew Elliott was coaching the Panthers.
Mm-hmm.
And like at 1 year with Matthew Elliott, we come second on the ladder by some miracle. And they managed to go from getting Matthew Elliott at the Panthers, having this one-off year where they come second, then tanking, then having this complete clean out of the club from top to bottom. And Ivan Cleary was a Panthers coach and then sacked and went back to the Panthers. In the whole time, the fucking West Tigers didn't even make the finals still.
Yeah. And this is the thing. We've tried every different type of coach you can. We had Tim Sheens,
mm-hmm.
and he wasn't good enough, even though the club was plateauing for years under him. They were plateauing and finishing ninth all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good enough. But that is so much better than what we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
We had Mick Potter, an experienced coach. He's still involved in coaching as an assistant coach. And he did a pretty decent job with absolutely nothing when he was over in England. What was it with Bradford?
Mick Potter, was it? I feel like it was St. Helens he ended up at.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, before that, when he was coaching for free.
Oh, I can't remember who it was with.
I think it might have been Bradford when Bradford had that period where they fell out of Super League and they just kept going into administration. I think he took over them then.
Mm.
And he kept them afloat. And he got them out of, it might have been League One and back into Championship. I'm not sure. I'll have to check that. But he was someone who obviously had experience. And the club was doing reasonably well. They had a horrible roster and he was starting to bring some juniors through.
Yeah.
And then that wasn't working quickly enough. So then Jason Taylor comes in and just the most unimaginative coach you'll ever see. He came in with this big talk about improving the Tigers' defence. Obviously, it got worse under him. And that's not entirely his fault because it got worse with every other coach we've had as well.
Mm-hmm.
But just unimaginative. And then he was eventually just used as a pawn to try and get rid of Robbie Farah, which they managed to do, only to bring him back to make the whole fucking period a waste of time.
Yeah.
All the pain we went through was a waste of time.
And they paid for him to play at the South Sydney Rabbitohs.
Yes, while also paying big money for Matt Ballon to sit on the sideline and not even play 80 minutes for the club in 3 years.
Yeah, I think, didn't he play something ridiculous, like 4 minutes all
up? It was about 50 minutes all up.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, ridiculous. So then they sacked him 3 weeks into 2017, I think it was. Brought in Ivan Cleary. And then they gave Ivan Cleary the green light to sign whoever he wanted. They had all this cap space free to sign whoever he wanted. He made all these signings for 3 and 4 years, obviously planning for the fact that he'd be coaching them. Only for, him wanting to coach his son, fair enough, and him deciding to leave. I mean, and a lot of West Tigers fans still have, the salty shits that Ivan Cleary over this. But the club should have been asking these questions at the fucking get-go. They knew Nathan Cleary was going to be playing in the NRL.
Mm-hmm.
They knew that he was Ivan Cleary's son. They should have just said, would you like to coach your son? Yes, no. Well, at the moment, he's not with our club. Do you think he'll come to the West Tigers? Yes, no. There's your answers. If you're not going to get a yes on all of those, and if you know that you're not going to get Nathan Cleary to the Tigers, don't sign his fucking father to coach your club if you know he wants to coach his son.
Yeah.
Look, nature just suggests he's going to go and coach his son. He doesn't care what team his son's at. He's going to go coach him, and he'll get a gig there if he can. That's what happened.
Is that the big what if of the West Tigers?
No.
In the last, I know there's a lot of stuff you could look at and say, man, if they didn't sign this guy, if they didn't sign this guy. If the Tigers at that period had said the Panthers have this young halfback, and it's very hard to know at that time that he's going to turn into the halfback he is today. I think that nobody knew that except Phil Gould, just ask him. But do you think that at that time the West Tigers had a window where they could have brought in Nathan Cleary and kept Ivan Cleary?
No.
I got that feeling too. I feel like Nathan was never, ever going to leave the Panthers.
No. I'll tell you why. And it's not just because, he loves Panthers. It's for me, it's got nothing to do with it. It's the fact that most of the guys he'd spent playing footy with since he was about 15 or 16 years old were all there at Penrith, all coming through at the same time. And it's an issue Luke Brooks had, because a lot of the blokes he played a lot of junior football with were part of the, in quotation marks, Big Four. They all left.
Yeah.
And so he was left without his support players who he could always rely upon to, do little plays with. They weren't around anymore. So Luke Brooks has just hung out to dry. That's where he is right now. Cleary was smart enough to know that he looks good when he's got these guys who he's played with. He knows their game. And he knows how they function. That by playing with them all the time, he makes them look good. They make him look good, and that's where success comes from. They were always going to stay together, and the only way he was going to change clubs is if all of those blokes who he had combinations with were all going to change with him to the same club. And too many moving parts. It was never going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So Tigers should never sign. But I would say that the big what if comes back to the end of 2011. And there was talk in that period of the 2011-2012 off-season, pre-season period. There were suggestions that Tim Sheens had done a handshake deal with the club's board and said, if we don't make the finals in 2012, I will step down as coach. And it was a handshake agreement. And then the West Tigers started, I don't know if you remember, the West Tigers started 2012, and they were the favourites to win the premiership that year. They'd been in the finals the 2 years before it, and they had improved in 2011. So they were the favourites to take the title out that year. And they finished 9th or 10th, and Sheens refused to step down. So the club said, we don't want to look weak. So they decided to sack him. That there was the problem, because they had no one in place to take over as coach from him. Because they sacked him, they're like, oh shit, now we need a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're still paying out his contract and end up having to pay a shit ton of money for a few years for it, they went, oh, we can't go and get the coach we want. We have to get one we can afford. And I dare say that's the reason why they looked at Mick Potter, because they heard that he was coaching for free. Oh, we can afford that. The last time the West Tigers, Balmain or West went and got coaches who work for free was Alan Jones at Balmain. That went well.
And they always feel like the club is making do. Well,
it has done since then. Like Tim Sheens was fine, but we needed to go up from him, not down.
Mm-hmm.
And all we've done since him was go down. We had a period where we plateaued a little bit under Cleary. So when Cleary first come along, the team had a few shitty losses. But after that, we kind of plateaued a bit. And we plateaued a bit under Maguire and started to improve a little up until about the midway through last year. And then the form has just fallen off a cliff. It's the drop in form, and it's all based on their crap defence, is almost identical in severity to that of the Broncos in the same period.
Yeah. It's at this point, the Tigers are it's not a great club that looks like it is on the verge of slipping into that Bulldogs territory of just going to be no hopers for years and years to come. And that's the weird thing about when I look at them at the moment. Like, this is the first time I've ever felt like I look at a club and I say the coach is good, but he can't fix this. Like, there's 1,000 moving parts that need fixed on this team and this club in general. And the coach is a premiership winner. I think that if he goes to most clubs, they're better for it. But I just don't think that any coach can fix this. I don't think you could sign Craig Bellamy and he could fix this.
Nope. Well, the Tigers had an opportunity to sign Craig Bellamy and they turned him down. So, that shows where they're at.
Yeah. The other thing for me, too, that stands out with the West Tigers is it's very rare that you get a blue chipper come through your junior development pathways and have a player that just wants to be at your club, never wants to leave. They want to play their career there. The West Tigers had two of them come through at the same time, one of whom was not just a blue chipper. One of them was an all-time great in Benji Marshall, the other blue chipper being Robbie Farah. These two players that never, ever, ever wanted to play for another club, just wanted to be there, would take unders and did so to stay at the club. And they managed to ruin the relationship with both players, even up until now, where whoever made the decision in the last off-season that the Tigers should get rid of Benji Marshall, they should be fired. I don't care who it is. They should just be fired, because I'm watching him play for the Rabbitohs off the bench and he is winning games. He is unstoppably winning games for them off the bench. And you look at him and you think, man, he could fix so many teams. But the team that could really use him is the West Tigers. And whoever made that decision is incapable of making rugby league decisions and personnel decisions.
Yes, I do agree in large with most of that. I don't mind Benji being moved on, because I do agree that he would make the Tigers better, but I don't think you'd make them better in a way that they'd be competitive enough to be pushing for a finals berth or anything like that.
No.
And I think what had to happen is the club had to move on from him, because what we saw from him last year when he was there, while he still played brilliantly last year, there was still this attitude of when in doubt, give it to Benji.
Yeah.
And it meant that Brooks was just coasting again. And we've created a system now whereby Brooks has not had to run the team for very much of his career. And he's getting into his mid-20s now.
Mm-hmm.
And he's now having to learn how to run the team on his own. It's too late.
Opportunity's gone. Done. He is what he is now.
Yeah. He was always the support act. And so he's become the support act. You know, he's the support act behind Mitch Moses, and now he's a support act behind Benji Marshall. And now he's supposedly got the leading role. And we saw it the other week when they played South. Adam Dewey was controlling most of the attack, and he's the 5'8".
And he's a makeshift 5'8".
Yeah, and he's got more idea as to how to run the side around the park than what Brooks does. So the club made the hard decision to get rid of Marshall. They're going to do the same with Brooks. Simple as that.
Has shown they do not have the ability to bring in players at the right time, at the right point of their career. Like, I mean, they absolutely lucked into Dane Laurie, you know. I worry, and they need to move on from Brooks. There's zero doubt about that. But does the club have the ability to look at the player market and say, we are getting this player to replace Brooks? And I have zero faith that they do. Like, I could see a situation where somebody at the club sits down and says, you know what we should do? We should get a replacement for Brooks who's younger. Let's get Jake Clifford. You know, so, along those lines, rather than the players that they really should be targeting.
Well, they'll just wait until there's scraps left over that no one wants, and then they'll make bids on those. And we'll be back here doing this all over again.
Yeah.
It's because they don't know how to run a club.
Yeah, and that's where I tweeted it out today. Justin Pascoe has to resign. I don't know what it takes for a CEO of a rugby league club to, number one, not get sacked, but number two, look at what you're doing and say, I can't do this anymore to this team. It's somebody else's job from this point on. I can't believe that the board has allowed this to go on as long as they can. Their board should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah, they've all got cushy jobs, so they don't care.
Yeah, they don't care. And, you know, it reminds me a little bit of the St. George Illawarra situation where the board was just untouchable because of it being a joint venture. And that, you know, you got these nameless, faceless people. And then you had Peter Doust, who was the CEO that was in charge of the club. And they just left it to him to be the face of the club and didn't put his job under pressure. You know, it wasn't until the Dragons were taken over by a private owner that things started changing for that club. Maybe that's the way for the West Tigers. And look, you could buy the West Tigers for cheap. You know, it'd be great. But, you know, there's all of these natural resources that they've got to use, like an embarrassment of riches. It's very much like the Panthers used to be, where big junior base, you've got the growing area of Sydney. No area is going to grow bigger than the area that the West Tigers control. And yet they're just a rabble of a club, and it can't be allowed to continue. And look, we even had at one point the NRL stepped in and took over running the club for a while. And even the NRL's influence couldn't get the West Tigers going in the right direction. So, like, what needs to change? And the only thing I can think changing it is somebody buys the club. And that's a huge change. But, you know, that's the only way I can see the real change needing to be made, because nobody there has the incentive. They can all have their jobs for as long as they want, except for the coach, and no one's going to put them under pressure. Because if that was the case, they'd have a new CEO. They would have years ago.
Well, they never would have signed that Turnip from Penrith anyway. I mean, he wasn't even a CEO there from memory. So, you know, I don't know why they could. I mean, before him, they had that Grant Meyer clown.
He was a joke.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
They're just utterly hopeless. I mean, there was a period there they were talking to Barry O'Farrell for running the club. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
We've got to stop this bullshit and actually just get someone who knows how to run a football, or not even a sports team, and make it successful. Mm-hmm. It's not that hard. You just set up coaches. You know, what they need to do is go get Dave Smith and say, you know what, put some structures in place so we're doing things the right way. It'll only take him a year. And then get some proper people in there running the club. Yeah, I saw someone online saying that, The club will get better once they get a centre of excellence. I'm like, oh, bullshit. Manly haven't got a centre of excellence. They made heap of grand finals in the 2000s.
Yeah, it's like the centre of excellence thing is just a nice thing to have.
It helps, but it's not going to help a team that's as shit as the West Tigers become a finalist. It's just going to help them be a little bit more competitive and concede 25 points in the game instead of 40, you know.
And that's the crazy thing. Like, that's another thing about this Tigers team. They should be moving towards the Campbelltown area more. But that centre of excellence is going to be in Concord.
This is the problem, though. There's this fear that if you go one way, there's this fear, I think, within the club that if we go too much towards Campbelltown, then the Balmain side will get the shits. Or if we go too much towards Balmain, all the west side will get the shits. And that attitude just needs to completely die in the arse and just go, you know what? We are our own team. If Balmain and West fans, if they still exist, want to keep bitching and moaning about that, fuck off. Yeah. We are the West Tigers. We've been around for 21 fucking years. We are our own team. And so what we're going to do is we're going to base ourselves at Campbelltown. We're going to train out there. We're going to have our centre of excellence out there. We're going to have our own stadium out there. We're not playing home games at Bankwest. We're not going to be playing them at Stadium Australia. We're going to play home games at Campbelltown. We might take 1, maybe 2 games a year to Leichhardt just for novelty. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And if they started playing at least 10 games a year at Campbelltown, you can then justify getting it upgraded to a bigger, better stadium.
Mm-hmm.
Because no council, state, federal, local, is going to give a shit about upgrading a stadium that only gets used 3 times a year. Who's going to pour millions of money into a stadium that's only going to get used 3 times a year?
Yeah.
That's a shit investment. Why upgrade that? It's like asking, it's asking the government to go and spend $35 million to build a new bridge over the creek down near where my mum and dad live.
Yeah.
There'll be 7 trucks will go over it in the space of a year. Like, why? And they don't understand this. They sit there and bitch and moan because, Brookvale's getting an upgrade and this one's getting an upgrade and that one's getting, pick a fucking home ground, stick to it, and you'll get the upgrade too, you idiots.
Exactly. But like this shows all of the problems that are at the Tigers. Like, it's every level of the club, and that's why I don't know that the idea that they're going to sack the coach, and it looks like they're going to. At the very least, he's on his last legs at the club. Like, when they start talking about having meetings about the coach, his time is done. Like, how many times have them meetings been held and it goes on to be a happy, rosy relationship? The idea that they're going to change the coach and all these problems will go away, they're not going to. And that's why I think the whole club needs a takeover of some sort. And like a private owner would be perfect, but I don't know if the West side buys out the Balmain side, so at least you've got one voice. I don't know how you do it. But the way it is right now, it's just not working.
The moment the club is basically run by West Ashfield, which is separate to the Magpies and the Balmain thing, so that side's fine.
Mm.
But the board members are basically still bickering, and that's all that'll happen. We need to start getting people who aren't affiliated with Balmain or West, and are just affiliated only with making the West Tigers successful.
Yeah.
And they've got to be people who know how to run successful businesses and successful sporting teams.
And who aren't going to use it as a platform to try and virtue signal and bullshit like that.
Yeah, and people who don't need to go into the fucking media to, explain shit all the time. Mm-hmm. That's the thing. Shit. Most CEOs at clubs should be people who are, seen and not heard at the absolute best of times.
Yeah.
West Tigers guy is always being heard.
And it's never about like...
Well, it's always about Penrith.
Yeah, it's like he's pissing and moaning about other clubs, or he's like, remember they were threatening a player that I think it was Josh Adokar. They said, you either play for us or you're in trouble. And he was like, fuck off. And he signed for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, you got no bartering ground.
Yeah.
And, by going around and putting demands on a player, just forcing them to go elsewhere. It's just stupid.
And that's another thing I think that needs to be thought about is, other professional rugby league players, they look at the different teams and how they handle things. And, if you're a player that goes to the Manly Seagulls aren't a very good club at the moment. But if you go and sign for the Manly Seagulls, you know that they're going to look after you as an individual. They're going to defend you. They're going to have your back. If you go to other clubs, like if you go to the Parramatta Eels, you're going to play at that beautiful stadium. You're going to be in a lot of big games. You're going to be at one of the glamour clubs in Sydney. There's a lot of positives to it. If you go to the West Tigers, you're not playing finals football. There's every chance that your teammates are just going to be a mishmash of players that were let go by other clubs, or
you'll get paid well though.
But that's the thing. Like you're making the decision. Like I look at a James Tarmo, and I would love to know what he's thinking, because he played for a Cowboys team that was very, very good. And then he went to a Panthers side that when he got there, it wasn't that great, and he left it and it was very, very good. And now he's playing the last contract of his career. He's playing for a club that is just abysmal. And I would love to know, like, would he give back the difference just to play at an all right club? Like, would he give back the difference to be a bench player at the Parramatta Eels right now, or to be a bench player at the Panthers? Or, there's so many situations you could put him into. Like, I wonder if he would still say, nah, I'd take the money.
Yeah, I think players like him, though, aren't. I don't think he's driven by the money side of things. I think he generally wants to just play good footy, because what we see on the field is him busting his ass all the time. And the same can't be said for a lot of the other players at the club.
Yeah.
And this is the thing, like, Maguire's been saying how, the game ebbs and flows and stuff like this, and we need to manage that better. And I think that's just code for there's a lot of things wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to start hauling every single player across the coals, because I'll be here all fucking day.
Yeah, and it's like, and there's no one left.
Yeah. He's like, at the end of the year, these blokes need to know that if you're not performing, because a lot of you are off contract, you won't be getting a contract with us. And if you can't get a contract with the West Tigers, who will you get a contract with?
Mm-hmm.
That's what needs to be said.
Well, I mean, you look at this West Tigers team right now. How many players in this squad do you think other teams would look at and say, ooh, we would love to have him? Like, I reckon Dane Laurie is number one. I think Tarmo, pretty handy pickup. I think Dewey would be all right. Norfoluma,
There's a few there. The problem the Tigers have got is not so much, it's not entirely the quality of the player. It's the fact that there's no cohesion, no communication, no structure. And a lot of that comes from a complete lack of skill in the halves and direction in the halves.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
And the other thing is, and this is the first time I think I've really properly seen this in a West Tigers team, this year there's a level of give up, like complete give up, which you only see from the Broncos last year, where they just given up. And
Tigers have always had that in them.
but I really honestly, my feeling is that this year it's a bit different. And it's hard to put my finger on it. I don't know if it's a level of give up that comes when, as a playing group, you don't have the answers. If, you get to a point where you've tried, you're not good enough, and you just don't know what else to do, and you're defeated mentally at that point. I feel like there's something a bit different in this Tigers team compared to other ones I've seen, where they're just purely not good.
Yeah, look, there's a few players there who, despite that, are busting their backside every week. So Dane Laurie, Nofaluma, Dewey, Tamo, Simpkin, Ichika Manu, Luciano Lalua, Alex Twal. So it's not, for them, it's not entirely about their skill levels, although I think their skill levels are good enough to be in the NRL. But they are actually going out there and busting their backside. They're trying. But that's only half the team. That's the problem.
Mm.
And Yeah, I'm sure James Roberts wants to play good football. I'm sure that all the players want to be able to go out there and say, I'm in really good form and I'm playing good football. Problem is, some of them just aren't good enough.
Yeah.
They may have been in the past. That's fine, but Roberts he's not even 20% of what he used to be at his best. He's not a game breaker at the moment. He's not threatening, and teams are going, if you're so fast, how are teams able to go past you and you're not able to reel them in when you've had a bad read? I don't think for a lot of them, I don't think their head's in the game 100%. And that's different.
Yeah. And look, with James Roberts, I think he played his most consistent football at Penrith. And then he made that move to the Broncos. And he had a couple of good games, but that was it. And even when South signed him, I was like, what are they doing? This is just a problem they don't need. It's a waste of money. Ooh. And it turned out to be. And
at
then
South,
the West Tigers...
He should have worked fine at South because everything that was set up there was designed to help him be at his absolute best. But his brain was not on football at that time, and that's why he was a disaster there.
Yeah, but it's like this is the player that the Tigers saw go from club to club to club, and if he's got his problems, that's fine. But the West Tigers saw all of this happening and said, yeah, him. But it's because they don't have an alternative because they didn't plan for it.
No, that's right. There's no long-term strategy. Just like, this bloke's available, let's put in a contract offer for him and see if he says yes.
Yeah.
That's it.
Like if they didn't get James Roberts, who had just been through a stint at rehab, and who quite honestly, I think James Roberts, shouldn't be playing. I think James Roberts' priority should be getting everything sorted out in his life. And I understand playing rugby league and having that salary and stuff is part of that. But I could completely understand if James Roberts' big thing every single day, the main issue is not rugby league. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And the thing you think about is like, what was the alternative if they hadn't have managed to pick up James Roberts the way that they did? It's not like they had planned it. No. It's just crazy to run a club like that.
I mean, the recent signing of Jackson Hastings is a good example, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
How many utility players who can slot in the halves do you need at a club?
Yeah.
You got Dewey, Hastings, Laurie. Obviously, there's Brooks there as well. Moses and Bai. Billy Walters. How many more do you need?
But I can see where the coach, and he was obviously involved in getting Hastings, where he's been at that club for long enough now where they must have been saying to him, yeah, we can't get that guy. We can't get that guy. We can't afford that guy. And he's got a chance to finally get somebody that's at least a specialist half. Even if he's not like Jackson Hastings isn't a makeshift half. He's a specialist half. And whether he's a 5'8" or a halfback, you can debate that. But I can see where he's finally got a chance to get a specialist half, and he's like, I got to take it. Because at the moment, my halves are Adam Dewey and a Luke Brooks, who's just might as well not be playing at the moment the way he's playing.
Adam Dewey, I think is a very handy six. I've got no problem with Adam Dewey playing there, but he needs to have a genuinely strong 7 next to him. I don't think Hastings is that. And that's not a criticism of Hastings. I think Hastings is a much better 5'8" than he's a halfback. I'd probably have Hastings at 5'8" over Dewey, if I'm honest. But I don't see why we'd need either of them when we've got Brooks, who's not up to standard as 7. He's probably a 6 as well, to be honest, given he can't control the team. So you've got 3 5'8", and Moses and Bai was at his best when he was playing at 5'8", so there's a fourth one. And Dane Laurie can play at 6. It's just good that he can play fullback because, that solves one problem.
Yeah.
How many players do you need that are kind of the same area? They had to try and turn Billy Walters into a hooker because he's just another 5'8". Why are we constantly getting the same player all the time. You can't put them all in the side. Why? This is what's irritating. Is they go through these phases where they'll just go, oh, we need this player, and they'll just go through a phase of getting, okay, we've got 5 hookers at the club, or we've got 5'8" at the club, or we've got, fucking think about your roster.
Yeah,
because when you've got 5'8" at your club, it means you're running short on forwards or backs, and so when you get injuries to some of those players, which will inevitably happen, you got no fucking depth, and then you're shit. And,
a team that had Benji Marshall signed Josh Reynolds, and that never for one day that Josh Reynolds was part of the club made any sense.
No,
not one day.
Nope.
Josh Reynolds has come and gone, and the problem's still there.
Yeah, and this is what I was making earlier today, statement-wise, is we've changed coaches, we've changed players for almost, for a good part of the last decade. And the results have not changed, they've got worse. That is a good example and a great justification as to how bad the people who make these decisions on who the coach should be and who the player should be. Because if they manage to get a coach and a playing squad that only make the club get worse every time, how can you be blaming the players and the coaches? Surely the people who hire them in the first place are the fucking idiots, because they're the ones who keep making things worse with their selections.
Yeah.
So why aren't they stepping down or being arseholed? Why do we have to keep going through recycling coaches and players only for the results to continually get worse and worse and worse? So the only thing that's going to happen, which might, I'm not convinced either, but the only thing that might force them to do some serious thinking about how the club's run is they win the wooden spoon, because that's something that they've somehow managed to miraculously avoid. And God knows they fucking deserve it.
Yeah, they do. It's in a season where only a few weeks ago you and me were saying there's clearly 3 bottom clubs, and we said it was the Bulldogs, we said it was the Manly Seagulls, and I think we said Brisbane from memory.
Yeah.
Now I think I can see positives in all of those clubs, and I don't see the positives in the West Tigers at the moment. And
sorry.
Well, we saw the Broncos a couple of weeks ago come out and really play a game against the Panthers, properly. There's no shortcuts. There was no injuries. That they properly went toe to toe with the Panthers. The Bulldogs, for all of their problems, just got their first win against a Sharks team that has their own problems. And Manly have come out in the last few weeks and looked fantastic. But so even these lower table teams, the Cowboys is another one. Todd Payton has maybe the worst squad in the NRL to work with, but he's got them trying their guts out, and they're getting at least some results out of it. And, it would be crazy in a season like this where we've said there's clearly these bottom teams, even in terms of talent. If the West Tigers got the wooden spoon, it would say a lot. Yeah.
I just say there's 2 stats at the moment about the Tigers. Okay, so at the moment, they are the worst defensive team in the NRL for this year. And they also have the worst, they've also conceded the most points out of all the NRL clubs since round 11 last year.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's not exactly close. They've conceded on average just over 32 points a game since round 11 last year. That's 546 points in 17 games. Yeah.
Wow, that's insane.
The Broncos are next worst. They've conceded 20 points less.
Yeah, and that Broncos team was historically bad defensively.
Yeah. And then Manly have conceded 44 points less. The Bulldogs, almost 70 points less. And the Cowboys, nearly 100 points less.
Wow.
Yeah. That's how fucking atrocious their defense is.
So I've got a question for you. I was chatting a little bit with Nadine on DMs earlier today about, what it must be like to follow a club like this. You only know what it's like when you know what it's like. What's it like? What's it like to follow a club where, like, this isn't something new? Like, you look at this situation, this isn't a new situation. This is just what the Tigers have done for a fucking decade. Like, how do you get up? How do you get excited for the games? How do you get excited for the seasons? Is everything just hoping that there's a change?
For me, the hope was gone a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get excited for the games anymore.
Yeah.
So that's why I can sit here and talk so honestly and openly, and I don't have any bias towards any clubs.
Yeah, and rationally, it's not like you're sitting here ranting and raving about, oh, they're not putting in and blah, 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 blah. Like, it's, you to get to that point where it just is what it is and you can talk about it the way you do. Like,
yeah, it's a part of, it is, it's their culture.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So you just accept it. And
yeah.
That's what's happened. And that's the problem the club has is, not finishing last was good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Finishing ninth, that means, we were so close.
Yeah.
We just have to train a little bit harder. And, getting to eighth, that's the ultimate dream. The ultimate dream is to get to eighth.
To eighth, yeah.
That's it. Like, that's all they want is just to get to eighth. And that's not fucking good enough.
No.
But that's the mentality the club has. If we can just get to eighth, we can get that monkey off the back and say, yeah, we've made the finals at last. That's their ultimate goal. That's the best they want.
Yeah, and like I know from following the Panthers, like when you have those seasons where, like, man, if we could just get a finals place, it would be nice. It'd be fun, knowing that it'd take a miracle to win the title. Getting seventh and eighth, it's fun when your team is not being good. Getting like sixth or fifth, it's like, man, that's pretty amazing. Being one of the top four teams is a absolute light year from that conversation. Like the club that would be happy with seventh or eighth, it's a completely different universe being like, we're aiming for top two. And I've only really felt that difference the last couple of years when Penrith have been good. And it makes you realise how incredible it is for a club like Melbourne, where every year they're like, we're aiming for top three. We'd probably be a top two side. But that just shows how far behind a team like the Tigers is, where, like, when you become a punchline with that ninth place thing, and a lot of those ninth places were miracles in themselves because Benji Marshall had literally performed the miracles on a football team to get them to that ninth place. They really should have been lower. It shows where they've been for so bloody long.
Yeah, just complacent.
Yeah.
Good enough. And so many people at the club just went, there was a comment back when Tim Sheens was coach, and a lot of the fans were pissed off because the side got smashed in one game. And there'd been lots of criticism, and lots of fans were saying that, they wanted Sheens gone. And he called them so-called fans.
Mm-hmm.
And this is attitude amongst the club that if you don't support the club and talk positively about them the whole time, then you're not a fan, you're not a supporter, you're a hater.
Mm-hmm.
Because apparently seeing something that you love have the shit punched out of it every fucking week is something that you should be happy about. Seeing it succeed and demanding changes so that you get to see it be successful is apparently the wrong attitude. And that's a mentality that's gone around through the club for as long as I can remember as a fan. Yeah. I've never understood it. I've always opposed it. And I'm only now starting to see that's starting to change.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken 21 years of shit. Well, there was 3 blips on the radar, but it's basically 21 years of shit.
And you know what? It's weird because it's comforting when you see that tide turning amongst the supporter base and it starts off as a little grumble and you're like, oh, there are people like me, I'm not alone. But when it gets to a roar eventually, and hopefully that's enough to bring in those changes where somebody, whoever it is, says, look, enough is enough with this. We're going to do something. And it's good to see that, because you're right. There's a thing with some supporter bases too, where they'll defend. And you've got to drop that. When your club is in that situation, you can't just defend the club. You've got to demand more from it. It's okay to demand more from it. They're professionals. The West Tigers players and their CEO and the coach, they're getting the same amount of money as, all of the other top clubs in the game. There's no charity here. There's no charity in rugby league. They don't deserve anything less than, demanding success from them. That's what their entire careers are based upon.
Yep. But, this is probably why I study statistics and history, because when my team's playing footy, I can just go do that instead.
Yeah. It's always comforting to look back into the 30s and be like, oh,
the
good old days.
44, what a year, what a vintage.
Yeah, good old 44.
Good year.
Maybe there should be a group of West Tigers supporters called the 44 who just try and get control of the club. Wouldn't that be great?
There you go. I don't think you'd find enough.
There might not be 44 of them. I tell you what, Justin Pascoe needs to resign. Be a man, Justin. Fall on your sword. You've tried. Even if you come out and say, look, I tried, I did my best, and I can't fix this mess, fair enough. But it's time for Justin Pascoe to go.
Yeah, you've had a crack. Your crack was shit. Fuck off.
Yes.
That's pretty much it.
I think that you and me had another topic we were going to talk about on the podcast. I think that this whole podcast should be about the West Tigers, because it's at that stage with this club.
Yeah, and I guess I really should start talking about other stuff on the podcast every week.
No, look, I get it, man, because I watch the footy and I'll be thinking, man, you know what, we'll talk about this and this and this. And then I'll watch the West Tigers play and it's like, oh my God, we need to debrief. It's nothing short of that, because it's shocking to watch. And it needs to be talked about. And there's some pretty bad teams in this competition, but these other teams haven't been terrible for 10 years.
No, and that's the thing. It's 3 finals appearances in 21 seasons. That's not acceptable.
No.
And I remember saying many, many years ago that I thought that 2005 was a fluke.
Mm-hmm.
And people argue with me all the time.
Mm.
And I wonder if those people look back and go, you know what, maybe he was right. Because we didn't look like making the finals for years after that.
I think the thing that when you call especially grand final, because a grand final is so difficult to win, when you call a grand final a fluke, I think that some people feel like built into that word is undeserved. And like if I look at the Panthers 2003 premiership, there were a lot of things that come together at the right place at the right time for that to happen. And it was very similar with the West Tigers, where, it was the right coach with the right idea and the right personnel, and a couple of superstars turned up as youngsters, one of them a transformative player, and it just was the right set of circumstances that come together at the right time. Now, you can call that a fluke, but I do think that some people take fluke as undeserved a little bit, and I don't know that is the case. But I can
Well,
see your point of view. I can see where it's like, man, this was a this was a bunch of chaos that in one moment, and it, like, you think back to that season, it wasn't like they dominated the entire season.
no.
Like, it was kind of like a boiling pot. It was like, oh, they're interesting, they're different, and by the end of the season, they're unstoppable.
Yeah. I mean, you just look at some bare facts, okay? There were three teams that didn't even make the finals that had better defence than the Tigers.
Mm.
And, I mean, the Roosters finished ninth. They conceded 90 points less than the Tigers that year.
Yeah.
It's not like it was a little bit. The Tigers lost 10 games that year out of 24.
Mm-hmm.
That's not dominant.
No. And yet, like, once we got to the final series, and it was like, look at this bloody team.
Well, that's the thing.
What's going on here?
At round 15, they were sitting in 12th place on the ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And then, just won, God, it might have been 8 games in a row.
Yeah.
And each week, the margin started to get a little bit wider and a little bit wider. You thought, oh, hang on, something's going here. And then 2 losses, right? I always remember the 2 losses at the end of the year, and I thought, oh, that's momentum shit. They've lost it now.
Yeah.
But they had a very fortunate run through the finals, taking on teams that had had a few injuries, were a bit out of form, whereas the Cowboys played basically 4 or 5 grand finals in a row.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
And so
there was the team the Cowboys played, might have been the week before, and it was just like a absolute blood and guts game. It might have been the Broncos or someone they played.
Well, they beat Melbourne in round 26.
Mm-hmm.
Then they got belted by the Tigers in the first round of the finals.
Yeah.
They beat Melbourne again in the semi. Then that match they played against Parramatta, they beat Parramatta 29-0. Parramatta were one of the favourites for the title that year alongside the Dragons.
Yeah.
And that performance against Parramatta would arguably be one of the best performances of the year.
Yeah.
And I thought, they are battle hardened.
Yeah, yeah.
They are ready to just take this thing by the neck and it's theirs.
Yeah.
The Tigers are just cruising through, smashing a few teams and didn't have to really do much defending. And I thought, they're not prepared whatsoever. And as it turned out, the Cowboys were just absolutely fucking tired by the time the grand final come around.
Yeah.
The Tigers just ran them ragged.
And like, if you look at that Cowboys team, they had a big forward pack.
Yeah.
And the West Tigers had that smaller mobile pack. And look, Benji Marshall, he was like a hand grenade in rugby league at that point, where we still weren't sure we were watching when Benji Marshall was playing in the grand final. We were like, this can't continue. Like, look at him. He looks like a touch footy player. He's throwing these ridiculous passes. They're not going to stick. He can't keep doing this. It's just all going to fall apart. And look, he's doing it this weekend, for Souths. We didn't know what we were looking at that point. So I can see that point of view from you, where I look at the Panthers and I line them up against the Panthers early 2000s, because I feel like there's a little bit of a similarity of a club that's not good, all of a sudden has a couple of good years, and then it sort of goes really quickly. I think that there was a lot more infrastructure and balance and depth in that Panthers club, and they only won the one premiership. And I felt like their 2014 might have actually been a better team overall. But that West Tigers team, it was like, it come out of nowhere and it kind of disappeared for a little bit, but then come back a little bit more, just based on, the legend that is Benji Marshall. But they never really capitalised on how good he was.
No. Yeah, so the year after the grand final, they finished 11th. Then 2007, they finished 9th. 2008, 10th. 2009, 9th. And each of those seasons where they finished 9th or 10th, they had themselves in a winnable position where they just needed to win like 2 of their last 6 games or something like that, and they just choked. They did it every year.
Yeah.
2010, they finished third. 2011, finished 4th. And then 2012, 10th, and haven't had a good season since. Really, 2018 they had 12 wins and 12 losses, and that's the only time they've had a 50% success rate in a season since making the finals in 2011. That's dire.
Yeah, it really is.
The club needs to stop looking at themselves and thinking, yeah, you know what, we're not far away, and they need to realise that they're a fucking long way away.
Yeah, I agree. They're they're at the very, very furthest you could possibly be, I believe. Because I agree with you. You said something earlier. You know, you've got more faith that the Bulldogs will turn it around before the West Tigers, and it's weird to think that because the Bulldogs are in a terrible situation themselves.
Well, I mean, who would have thought that the Titans, from the misery that they were in for so long, that they'd be able to turn it around? But here we are.
Yep.
They've done it. Even they've managed, with all of the failure that's happened with not just rugby league in the Gold Coast at the top level. Every sport on the Gold Coast has just been a failure. It's just where sport goes to die.
Yeah.
And yet, despite that, they've managed to build themselves a team which looks like it's going to be competing for a final spot this year.
Yeah, and like they're one or two players away from being a scary, like they could be good for 5 to 8 years sort of team.
Yeah, and here's the Tigers with 120 years worth of history in 2 development areas, and they can't build a competitive team. Come on.
Yeah, it's not good enough.
Nope. So, yeah, it's time that people who aren't players or head coaches there got replaced before the year is out. And then you can start looking at roster changes and coaching changes if that doesn't work.
If Maguire does get sacked or falls on his sword, either one, and look, they make it look one way or the other depending on how they want to go with it. Do you think that the supporter base, that will be the final straw?
No.
Okay.
We've seen this shit before.
Yeah. I just have never seen a situation where I felt like a club has a good coach, but he can't fix this. It's a really weird situation, and it's something I just have never seen, and I don't know what to think of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes from the fact that throughout most of the 90s, both Balmain and West were largely shit.
Yeah.
You know, the Magpies had, 2 seasons, I think, in there where they made the finals. And that was on the back of having pretty good forward packs.
Yeah.
And the Tigers did it in 89 and 90. They made the finals in those 2 years. And that was on the back of, 89. I mean, if they had a salary cap in 89, that Balmain side was over the cap by a fucking long way.
Yeah, it's weird.
By more than any other club.
Yeah, I can't. It must be weird for people to, and it must feel like it's just, when we think of the St. George Drag, the great St. George Dragons teams, like the Balmain Tigers were the team. They were number one. They were like, it was like a team of superstars. And look, they didn't win the premiership. It's very, very famous situation. Maybe one of the best teams to never win a premiership. But like the scenes of like Balmain Leagues Club was the place to be, and the Balmain Tigers and all this sort of stuff. And it's weird that they fell off so quickly. And West were different. West had been dying for 20 years. But Balmain was different. And
I mean, that Balmain side in 89, I mean, nearly every single player on that side was under the age of 30.
Yeah.
And you look at the forward pack, I mean, they had State of Origin player David Brooks at lock. You've got Paul Sirenen and Bruce Maguire, both test players that year for Australia, in the back row. Steve Roach, front rower, test player as well. Benny Elias at hooker, played for Australia either side of that year.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wayne Pearce as well in the side, former test player at that stage. Then you throw in the fact that Gary Jack was the world's best player the year before, I think it was, or 2 years before, at fullback. Russell Gardner, former Test player. Andy Courier, he wasn't that great, but he played Test footy for England that year at centre. Sean Edwards, he was only 22 then and at the peak of his career.
That's crazy.
Gary Freeman, Kiwi halfback. They're just the people who played pretty much Test footy. Then you look at the guys who would go on to become Test stars like Tim Brasher. It's crazy to think. James Grant had come to the club. He'd played for Rugby Union Test for the Wallabies.
Mm-hmm.
It's just nuts that they had such an immensely brilliant side, and even they couldn't build on that. And none of those guys were 30 at the time. Even Wayne Pearce in 1989 was only 29 years old.
Yeah.
And they couldn't build on that. It was 2 years later they were out of the finals and being coached by a moron. Sorry, morons being nice.
It is strange, and spent the rest of the 90s being
in the wilderness.
Almost a tragic story sort of thing.
It wasn't until Wayne Pearce became coach in 94, and they did win the spoon in 94, but from there up, he's the only coach I can think of that the Tigers had, and I'm talking about Balmain Tigers, who tried to build a junior pathways to get young players from the lower grades into the top side.
Yeah.
And while Balmain didn't make the finals under his time there, they had become quite a strong defensive side. And teams struggled to score points against them, but they'd scored just enough to beat them.
Yeah.
It's a frustrating thing, but at the same time, you'd see these teams, like I remember in 97, they played up against Manly and the Knights, and you're just expecting them to put cricket scores on the Tigers. Yeah. And every time it was like 16-14 or 14-12 or something like that, and you're like, fuck, they're just like one or two X-Factor type players away from being good enough to make the finals.
Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that also hurt them is that was during the Super League war period. And so at that time, like somebody coming in and saying, listen, I want to work on our junior development pathways. They were probably told, we've just got to sort out these million other things first. Like every single club's junior development was the very last thing they wanted to talk about at that time. Because there was so much going on.
I think too, there's so many of the Tigers players in that 89 side all retired within about 2 years of each other.
Yeah.
And they just didn't have, if they had have had a good coach come in directly after Warren Ryan's period, instead of that pot plant that came in, then they would have been able to get that next group of players to come through and learn from those fucking world-class players for 2 years and be ready and raring to go when they all retired. But that just didn't happen. He brought along some Muppets from Rugby Union and I don't know, he just fringe players from elsewhere, and it's kind of where the club stopped looking backward, looking within. They started looking elsewhere. Mm-hmm. The failed venture to get Mark Geyer across. I love watching Mark Geyer as a player, but that move to the West Tigers was just diabolical, and I dare say he'd probably even agree.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure when he's talked about it, he said like it was just all round a disaster. It come from a good place, but was just bad for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, he left Penrith for obvious reasons. That was because the death of Ben Alexander, and so for him, he needed to get away from that place for a little while just to get his head in the right spot. And I think the smartest move for him would have been to just not play football for a year and then go back to Penrith a year or two later. Yeah, he went into this wilderness thing, wandering around between the Tigers, and then he had dramas there. Then got picked up by the Western Reds, which wasn't too bad of an idea, but had a few disciplinary issues over there, and then came back to Penrith and was fine again.
Yeah, and I think that I've heard him talk about that his time at Perth, and I think that was really good for him just as a person. It sounds like. And once again, it was a weird situation, Super League war, and everything's chaotic at that time in rugby league. And once he come back to Penrith, it was like it was cathartic for him. You could tell that just by watching him on the footy field. But yeah, it's been a weird situation at the Tigers, and a weird situation leading up to the formation of the joint venture. When they come together, there was a lot of skepticism about how good they'd be and whether it was the right sort of joint venture. They, even early on, they had some really solid players. They had some real clubmen. And I think that's one of the things that they were lucky with, that they, the St. George Illawarra Dragons, when they come together, it was more about stars all coming together on the same team. The West Tigers had to try and build a club, and I think they lucked out that they had some personalities. And the main one I'm thinking is Darren Centre, where you could say this is a guy that you can actually build a club around. Not so much win, and I'm not saying he was a bad player. He was a very good player, but he was a clubman that could build just the right environment for a team to move forward.
Yeah, one of those sort of players you look at as being, a heart and soul player for your club.
Yeah, who can build a culture around.
Yeah. No, they've been clueless for ages.
Yeah. Oh man.
Well, it's not all shit sandwiches.
No,
because in the New South Wales Cup, which is the reserve grade competition, Penrith's undefeated there.
Yeah.
175 points for against 62. Their defence is insane.
That's crazy.
Second place, Western Suburbs Magpies.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, it's something that I'm finding is being brought up an awful lot in press conferences.
Yeah.
Mostly by one or two guys from the commentary team in Fox Sports.
Yeah.
And that is, your New South Wales Cup team's going pretty well. You're going to bring any of those guys in? And Madge goes, yeah, I've definitely got my eye on it.
Yeah.
So maybe it's time to just go, fuck it. Let's just not care about the result 1 week and bring up a few of these guys, like a chunk of them, and just say, right, we're going to put 4 or 5 of them into the NRL side and sink or swim.
Yeah, because you would rather get flogged with a bunch of youngsters and know what you've got from those players and give them a bit of experience and that, than get flogged with a bunch of veterans who aren't going to be there anyway in a couple of years' time.
Yeah. Especially guys who want to be in that jumper. That's the one thing you want to see.
Yeah.
It's okay to get beaten if you're lacking in skill, but it's not okay to get beaten if you're lacking in effort.
100%.
So that's something that could happen. That'd be good to see.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And they need to open up them doors to that pathway. All of those players in their junior development areas need to know that everything leads to being a West Tigers first grade player if they're good enough. And they can start that right now.
Yep. That'd be good. So, yeah, that's something to work towards.
So that's the West Tigers as we stand.
Yeah. Our most miserable episode ever.
It possibly could be. I'm very sorry that that the club's in this situation because...
Yeah. You don't need to be sorry, man. I'm used to this shit. It's fine.
The thing is, I look at everything they've got and they should be an absolute juggernaut. This is a club that has the potential to look at a team like the Parramatta Eels and just dwarf it, in terms of the supporter base, the junior base, so many things. They should be looking at a lot of these Sydney teams and just saying, we are so much bigger than you. And that's the goal. That's the aim. And it's the complete opposite at the moment, and it needs changed. And I hope that change happens. I hope it happens immediately. I would love to wake up tomorrow morning and hear that the West Tigers had called a press conference and they're getting rid of the CEO. A couple of board members have stood down. Things like that. It would be good for rugby league. As a rugby league fan, it would be good for rugby league overall.
It would. No, that's not going to happen.
No, I think Madge is gone.
Yeah, he's gone. He's got the full support of the board now, so he's gone.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
Alrighty. Well, Is that it for this episode, you reckon?
Yeah, let's wrap this one up. I think that this needs to be its own thing.
Yeah, we'll put this one to bed.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Fergo Freak Pod. We're on LinkedIn, YouTube, MySpace, Instagram. I think I've already said that one. So check us out on those. Subscribe, like, thumbs up, all that sort of gear. That's fantastic. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating and a review on your podcast listening app. And we'll read that out on the podcast and we'll put it up on the website, Freaky.
Yeah, we add all of them on the website, which is fergoandthefreak.com. You can go there if you want to send us an email about anything we've talked about today or anything that's on your mind about rugby league. Go to the contact section and send us an email from there. That's the only way you can contact us on the podcast, and we'll read out your emails.
Sweet. And that's pretty much this one done.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Catch us all next time.